Okay, apologies, Year 11, that I haven't been able to do this live. I will work out what's going wrong and take my laptop in to show Miss Wardroper, but it won't let me do this via Teams. So I don't think I'm going to be able to do it live. So I thought if I pre-record something for you, at least you can watch it. What I'll also do is I will make sure I'm sort of checking my phone a lot, probably up to about 7 o'clock. So if anybody has any questions at all, they can just email me directly. And like I said, up till 7 o'clock, I'll make sure that I am responding to anything that you send in. So I'm going to do 2 videos. I'm going to do one on Romeo and Juliet, and then I'm going to stop this one and then record another one on the anthology poetry, just to try and keep the 2 file sizes a little bit smaller for sharing. So, as I hope you're aware, tomorrow is your first GCSE in the morning. Me and Miss Street will be available from 8 o'clock, might end up being 8:05, depending on how quickly we get into school. And we will be doing some breakfast revision as well. So hopefully we'll see you there. So this is literature paper 1. It's 2 hours long. You will have an hour on Romeo and Juliet, and then you will have an hour on the unseen poetry. So let's think about the Shakespeare section first then. There will be 2 questions. You must answer both. Please, and some of you, about 10 of you did this in the year group in your mock, only answer Romeo and Juliet. Do not answer on Othello or Much Ado About Nothing or Macbeth or any of the other Shakespeare plays. We could have chosen to do that as a school. We choose Romeo and Juliet. You know Romeo and Juliet. Only answer Romeo and Juliet. Okay. So question 1 will ask you to write about how the character, or sometimes multiple characters, speak and behave in an extract. And often, but not always, they will also say, how would the audience react to this part of the play? If it is a soliloquy, meaning a speech spoken by one character to an audience, it will be thoughts and feelings. So one of the mocks you did was Juliet's soliloquy, where she's talking about her fear of drinking the potion to fake her own death. That was thoughts and feelings, because obviously it's supposed to be her thoughts. That's what a soliloquy is. So let's say it's Romeo's soliloquy when he's standing like a creepy lunatic outside Juliet's bedroom window in the balcony scene. That would be what are Romeo's thoughts and feelings, because it's just him speaking. If it is a normal sort of bit of the play where there's multiple characters speaking and it says in the question characters, please make sure you write about more than one. So let's say it is Capulet being horrible to Juliet in Act 3, Scene 5 when she's refusing to marry Paris, and the question is write about how the characters speak and behave. You would want to write about Capulet, you'd want to write about Juliet, you want to maybe write about Lady Capulet. So if it says characters, more than one, please do write about more than one character, okay? So you should spend roughly about 20 minutes on that. And I'm going to talk you through later on in the video a little bit more details on how to approach that. So after 20 minutes, you move on to question 2. This is a longer essay style question, which is why you spend about 40 minutes on it. Now, this will ask you to write about how a character or a theme is presented at different points throughout the play. It's also worth noting that 5 marks are for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So proofreading your work for the fact that you've spelt Shakespeare correctly. It's literally written on the exam paper. They take very poorly to you spelling Shakespeare wrong. Please make sure every time you talk about a character, you have used a capital letter. If you don't do that, you'll struggle to even get 2 marks out of 5. Okay, so I know it sounds like a basic thing, but too many of you, irrespective of what grades you're working at, because there are some top grade students that do this too, you must remember those basic things, okay? Now, this question is testing your wider knowledge, okay, your complete knowledge of the play. So it is important to show as much knowledge as you can about different points. And you really want to approach this question chronologically. That means you start at the start and you end at the end. Or if it's a character that we don't see at the end, you end with the last time we see that character. It's probably not going to be Tybalt or Mercutio because they've already came up, but let's say it is. They die in Act 3, Scene 1. So your essay there would end with Act 3, Scene 1. If it's Benvolio, who hasn't come up yet, one of the few main characters who hasn't, again, your essay is going to end at the end of Act 3, Scene 1, the fight scene, because Benvolio is not in it again. But they want this systematic tracking through. Again, more on that in a moment. Then, after an hour, and please, when you get into that exam, it will tell you when your exam has started. At the very least, work on an hour. So if your exam starts at 9:18, at 10:18, you have to move on to the anthology poetry section. There are a lot of you that failed to pass your mock because you messed up the timings, or in fact didn't answer question 2 of the poetry. It is never, ever a good idea to go, oh, well, I'm just going to spend 2 hours on Romeo and Juliet because I'm going to pass that way. You won't pass. Okay? You will not. So you must answer every question. That is really, really important. So after an hour, you will move on to the anthology poetry section. Again, you have an hour and you have 2 questions. So it's really nice and straightforward because you also spend 20 minutes on question 1 and you spend 40 minutes on question 2. Now, question 1 will ask you to write about how a theme is presented in one of the poems from the anthology. Yeah, that lime green anthology. These are all poems you should already know. It will remind you as well to write about the context. Now, the context means anything to do with the time it was written, anything to do with what was going on in the poet's life, or how the poem is influenced by things that happened in the poet's life. Okay, you will struggle to get a grade 4 without any reference to the context. So it is really important you remember to do that. The good news is you will have a blank copy of this poem, the poem they tell you to write about, that will be on the exam paper. So even if it's the worst possible poem that could come up, or it's a poem that you don't know very well, you at least have a copy, even if you have to treat it as an unseen poem. You have a copy there, okay? Now, question 2 is where it gets tricky, potentially, because you have to pick one poem of your choice from the anthology with the same theme as the poem from question 1. And you have to then compare how that theme is presented in your chosen poem to how the theme was presented in the poem from question 1. You have to write about your chosen poem from memory. You also have to remember to write about the context and ideally compare the contexts. Now, all of your English teachers have advised you to look at a small group of poems. What those poems are might vary slightly because there's no right answer. But ideally, if you've done your due diligence and done your revision, you should know 3 to 5 poems pretty well. And for this question, you want to pick from one of those 3 to 5 poems you've been revising. So you have a little bit of a process to go through here and a little bit of a plan. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more on the next video that's focused on the anthology poetry. So switching back to Romeo and Juliet, then let's think about that section in a little bit more detail. There's 4 central themes in Romeo and Juliet. Love, which is the only theme question that has come up so far on the exam papers. Hate, death, and fate. Now, there has been a question on conflict. So one year was right about the theme of conflict and how it's presented at different points in the play. Now, conflict was an interesting one and actually one that threw quite a lot of students. They were a little bit unsure about that. Conflict could essentially be defined as looking at hatred. So that sort of links in to that theme. But remember, conflict doesn't necessarily have to be conflict as in fights. It could be conflict in terms of issues between different characters. For example, conflict between Capulet and Juliet in Act 3, Scene 5 when she doesn't want to marry Paris. So it could be a theme question, but not use one of those 4 words: love, hate, death, or fate. But these are generally the 4 main ideas that Shakespeare is asking us to think about. Like I said, apart from love and conflict, all of the other years it's been a character question. So do be prepared for it to be a theme question or a variation on one of these themes. Character questions then. Now, these are some of the characters, the main characters who haven't come up. Tybalt's come up, Mercutio's come up, Romeo's come up, and Juliet has come up. Now, that doesn't mean they won't recycle those questions. For example, last year for an Inspector Calls, Mr. Burling came up, and Mr. Burling came up in 2017. So this exam board will reuse questions potentially, or similar questions on similar characters. So just because Tybalt's come up doesn't mean Tybalt won't come up again. But these are the questions on the main characters that haven't. So we haven't had a question on Benvolio. And I think most classes have done a practice or done some work on Benvolio as a character. Friar Lawrence is in it enough that a question on Friar Lawrence could come up. Lord Capulet, Juliet's dad, is in it enough that a question on him might come up. It could be a question on a couple of characters. Write about the secondary characters, such as Friar Lawrence and the nurse. A secondary character would be one of the characters who isn't Romeo and Juliet, who are the main characters. One year, a question came up which was phrased, write about some members of the Capulet family and how they're presented at different points in the play. So it could be write about some members of the Montague family and how they're presented at different points in the play. The obvious 2 there would be Romeo and Benvolio. A possible question that might come up: write about some of the different relationships in Romeo and Juliet and how they're presented at different points in the play. Again, you could write about Romeo and Juliet, but you could also write about Romeo and Benvolio, Romeo and Mercutio, Romeo and Friar Lawrence. You could write about Juliet and her father, Juliet and the nurse. So in those types of questions where you could choose different types of relationships or write about a range of different characters, you would have to do some quite careful thinking in your planning to decide which ones you would talk about. So I guess what my overall point here is that don't be thrown if the question is not just write about Benvolio and how he's presented, or write about hate and how it's presented. The question could be worded slightly differently. It could be worded to give you a much broader choice of what you could choose to write about. Now, on one level, that's easier because there's lots of things you could choose. Whereas if it's Benvolio and you don't know a lot about Benvolio, that's a lot more challenging. Equally, though, when it's a very broad question and you get to choose, some people find it quite hard to know what to choose. And that's why you must give yourself up to 5 minutes at the start of this question to create yourself a little plan. That's really important. If you just start writing whatever comes into your head, you are probably going to have cognitive overload and your brain's going to become overloaded about 15 minutes in. And that's when students begin to sort of stop and panic and put their heads down and don't really know what to do next. While you're calm, while your brain is sort of processing everything, do yourself a little plan. That plan only has to make sense to you. You can do that plan on the exam paper, okay? Or if you do it in the exam booklet, you can just put a little line through it when you're done. It really doesn't matter, but you absolutely need to be doing a plan and give your brain the time to really think, what are the best things I could refer to really show off my knowledge? So let's think about how to approach each of these different types of questions then. So the first question then, the extract question, which remember we spend about 20 minutes on. Now it's important to read the question carefully and highlight the key words. That goes for every question, okay? You then need to read the extract and try to remember what is happening in the section of the play and which section of the play it's roughly from. Now, if you aren't able to go, oh, that's Act 2, Scene 4, it doesn't matter. But hopefully you've got enough of a broad knowledge of this play and the sequence of events that you'll roughly be able to think, oh yeah, that's sort of from the middle,